If it was legal, they would be killing off these people, right?
Booyakasha. Welcome to Mad That with Harry and Carl. Shabba.
Hello and welcome to Mad That, brought to you by Have Word Studios. I'm Harry Robinson.
I'm Carl Riegler.
And if you like what we're doing here, make sure to like, subscribe.
Do all that. Like, subscribe, comment. This is Series 1. In Series 2, if you've got an idea of a guest who you know, please drop it below. We will listen. We will reach out to them. So, yeah.
And we can get in touch with anyone, as we've
Anybody.
famously proven.
I mean, he's proved, you see the guests in this season, the people he's got. Next, what are we getting next? We're going to go for the Queen.
The Queen, the Pope.
The Pope, yeah.
King Henry VIII.
King Henry VIII.
He's coming on season 3.
That's the first 3 episodes. So what you want to see after that, comment below. And go and check our socials out. Go and check Have a Word socials out. And yeah, if you like what we're doing, tell us. We're narcissists. We like to know.
We're going to jump into the intro, which is going to be recorded immediately after we finish talking to today's guest.
Yes.
So just enjoy that. Understand that that's the context for it. And just dive right into it. Hope you enjoy.
Nice one. He's so erudite and he's very well spoken, man.
Possibly the most well spoken person we've had on so far, between him and Chris.
Yeah, he was great to listen to.
This episode is with Apostate Alex. Alexander Barnes-Ross,
former member of this Church of Scientology.
Based in the UK. He was a part of the London org of the Church of Scientology and is self-proclaimed the number one
enemy of the state of Scientology in the UK.
Yeah. So Alex, as he'll tell in his story, got into the Church of Scientology when he was 15 and then joined properly when he left school.
Seemed like a vulnerable 15-year-old as well.
Yeah, well, this is something that, for anyone who doesn't know, my background really is in kind of cult interviewing. And his kind of story that he talked about in terms of getting plucked by the Church of Scientology is very similar to every kind of religious group where they go for vulnerable people or they go for people who are changing, like they're in a state of kind of change, I guess.
Or a state of trauma. And hey, we can help you. We're the good guys. And then when they're the people who fix you, then they're the people who control you. And
yeah,
it takes over, doesn't it?
Like when we wanted someone from Scientology on, there is always the thing in the back of your head where it's like, oh, we can talk about all, they all believe in mad shit. They believe in Xenu, the space god, and all the stuff that
Tom Cruise.
They believe in Tom Cruise. That South Park is, like kind of covered well and stuff like that. And what really happened in that interview is the curtain was pulled back on Scientology, where you got to see the real dark truths about the church.
Yeah, he said some shit, and I was like, "Oh, wow!"
But it is important shit to put out there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. His goal is not to badmouth the religion Scientology. It's to shine a light on the people who use Scientology to abuse people.
Absolutely.
I think that's the message that I got from that anyway.
And I mean, we probably have like a folder now in this.
That's amazing. He said, coming up, but he said anybody who's involved in any anti-Scientology will automatically just be put in a folder and investigated. And we've just interviewed the biggest enemy of the state. So me and Harry now probably have a really small folder.
Well, I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to kind of screech as he was talking. But when I was in LA, I stayed in a hostel on Hollywood Boulevard, and there was the big Scientology center on Hollywood Boulevard. And I did the personality test. They gave me a little QR code, and I did it. But they'll have my details, definitely, because I just filled in my email and my phone number. So, I mean, if they want to start building a folder, they have
some information.
Which links to loads of, my Nando's account is created with the same email. So they have my
Scientology,
they're free starters.
Sit on them, mate. Sit right on them. I'm not asked. Come. What are you going to do? Come and have a word. Sit on the couch. We'll fucking interview you, little maggot.
Yeah,
David Miscavige, fucking sit on it.
I think that's the best way to open this episode. David Miscavige can suck a fart at my arse.
I'm on.
And should probably, do we say allegedly, so that we don't get sued by the Church of Scientology?
This interview allegedly happened.
Allegedly, yeah.
We could be II.
We could be II. We could be pirates.
L. Ron Hubbard is a big fat maggot. So let's have it.
It's probably worth pointing out there that the Church of Scientology, one denies that L. Ron Hubbard's a maggot.
And they don't endorse us either.
And they certainly don't agree with anything that Alex says. But
No.
we do.
We listened. And if Scientology want to jump on and they want to chat to the Mad Daft fellas, let's
Absolutely.
go. Until then, Apostate Alex is who we're listening to.
So enjoy. Another high five. There we go. So, Alex.
Hi.
Do you prefer Apostate Alex or Alex Barnes Ross?
Just call me Alex, it's fine.
Alex. So a question we like to start out with our guests. I mean, obviously, like we can brand you as like the ex-Scientologist or that kind of stuff. But in your words, I guess, who is Alex? Who is Alexander Barnes Ross?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so my name's Alex. I'm from London. I live down here in the UK, and I used to be a Scientologist. I was a director of public book sales at the Church of Scientology in London when I was a teenager, and now I have a YouTube channel and a blog where I talk about the abuses that go on inside Scientology. But outside of Scientology stuff, I work in marketing and events. That's what I do. It's my day job.
Do you feel that kind of this phrase of ex-Scientologist defines you a little bit, or I mean, obviously that's your kind of front facing what you put out on your YouTube and stuff like that. But do you see yourself as an ex-Scientologist first before everything else, almost, or?
I mean, it's a huge part of me. I mean, it's really interesting. Scientology consumes your life when you're in Scientology. So it becomes everything about you. You are a Scientologist first and foremost. And so when I left, I went through a period of time where I wasn't doing any Scientology, I wasn't thinking about it or anything at all, and it was not a part of me whatsoever. But that's because I just pushed it down and didn't want to think about it and relive the trauma and all that sort of stuff. And so since revisiting that, and I've since started speaking out and doing the activism that I'm now doing, it has once again become a huge part of my life, but not because I'm a Scientologist, but because I'm an ex-Scientologist and I'm trying to do what I can to raise awareness about the abuses and help people leave and escape, and do what I can to say, hey guys, this is a harmful, dangerous movement that is continuing to harm people to this day here in the UK. So yeah, it is a huge part of my life. And I don't know whether I would say it defines me. I would say I define myself with my life and what I do, the friends I hang out with and all that sort of stuff. But it is a huge part of my life, yes.
Mm-hmm.
What does the day-to-day life of a Scientologist look like? Like, how's it different to your life now? Obviously, it's big, but what was your day like back then?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand, there's kind of three different tiers of Scientologist, right? There's a parishioner, what they call a public. So a public Scientologist is someone who walks into a church and they do a course or they read a book. They pay for that service, and then they go about their life and they apply Scientology in their life. That's the sort of everyday level public Scientologist. And then you have a staff member, which is what I was. So I was at all the city level churches. So London, Birmingham, Manchester, Sunderland, Plymouth. They have staff members who sign 2.5 or 5 year contracts to work for the organization. And that would be Monday to Friday, 9 till 6, or the evenings and weekend shift, which is called Foundation. So the church is open 7 days a week, 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. And there's 2 shifts of staff within that. And then there's the next level up, which is the C organization. That is the most devout, dedicated Scientologist staff members who fulfill all of the upper level management roles in Scientology International. And they sign 1 billion year contracts dedicating their entire lives to working for Scientology. They work 7 days a week, 14, 16, 18 hours a day. There's no time off, no holiday. You don't get paid. So there's 3 different tiers of Scientologists. And so what your life looks like as a Scientologist is very different according to where you're at in that kind of spectrum, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd love to ask you to, are you able to kind of tell us your story, I guess, of how you got into Scientology and how you first heard about Scientology? Because I know you got into Scientology really young, didn't you?
Yeah, so I was 15, I think. I had heard a bit about Scientology and, read some stuff online, and I'd seen a few documentary, or I'd seen the BBC Panorama documentary that John Sweeney did. That was the second one. He did two different panoramas, and the first one was much more about what Scientology is and the abuses and that. The second one was a lot more about fair game, which is how the policy Scientology used to come after critics. And I saw this video where a journalist was shouting at a Scientologist, and a Scientologist where there was clearly some sort of disagreement, and they were fighting back to defend their faith. And so I didn't look at that and think, sign me up. I looked at that, I thought, what is it they actually believe in? Because that didn't come across to me in that documentary. I wasn't interested in joining whatsoever. I just wanted to find out, what is this group and why are they so vehemently defending their faith? I've never seen anything like that before. So I did research online, and I sort of went in and did a personality test and just said, look, what's this about? I heard you guys believe in aliens. I've heard you disconnect families. I've heard you, trap people or punish people and all this sort of stuff, asking all the questions you would. What is it that you're doing and why do you do that? But the thing that people don't realize about Scientology is, yes, it's a crazy American cult, but it is also a harmful movement that uses coercive control. And part of that tactic is exploiting people's vulnerabilities. So as a teenager, I was very vulnerable. I'd gone through a lot of loss. I had a load of friends die and that sort of stuff. I'd moved around a lot as a kid. So they exploited that, and they said, well, hey, look, if you want to find out about Scientology, why don't you try doing a life improvement course? It's like £30. You basically read a book, and it gives you tips and tricks and tools and advice you can apply in your life. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then so what? And you can see for yourself whether anyone here is trying to coerce you, or anyone's trying to abuse you or tell you to disconnect from your family, because that's not what Scientology is. That's just what the press say. So from the very get-go, they gaslight you and lie to you and manipulate your vulnerabilities and try and present Scientology as a solution to some problem that you have in your life. So I thought, okay, well, what's the harm done in buying a book and reading a book? And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like, I can leave at any time. I'm not going to, allow myself to be abused or anything like that. And then over time, because the love bombing is so intense, and because everyone so vehemently denies any allegation that is ever made of them, and I'm spending more and more time in the org, the churches are called orgs, short for organization, you start to build a picture in your head of what Scientology is that is wildly different to what you've seen in the press. Because I'd been there 6 months. I'd been going every day after school and just like doing courses and meeting people. Everyone was really friendly. Everyone wants to try and help each other. And everyone was quite young as well. They're all around the same age as me. And I was like, this is so not what was presented in the BBC Panorama documentary that I watched. So I started to think, okay, well, maybe the BBC Panorama documentary, John Sweeney, maybe he was biased. I mean, he was shouting at Scientologists. Maybe he was deliberately trying to paint it in a bad light. Or maybe there are abuses and things that go on in Scientology. But over in America, at their headquarters, many large organizations have all of these issues at upper level management and corruption and all this sort of stuff. So maybe it's a problem over there that it's not a problem here. So you start telling yourself these things, and you start to build up a picture in your head as to why what you've read and seen is false information. But then over time, you end up falling victim to those things yourself. They don't subject you to abuse on day one. It's something that happens over time. And it's something that by the time you're receiving the abuse, you're also giving out the abuse, because you're indoctrinated to think that actually you're helping people. And you're so far in, it's become everything about yourself. And it takes a long time to realize that you've been tricked and you've been conned.
Was there a point in your kind of Scientology experience where you realised that ticker had moved over to abuse a bit more than kind of love bombing? Was there any point that you thought, oh, this is actually not nice, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are always moments when you think that it's not nice, but you justify it in your head, because in Scientology, you believe that Scientology is not just a way of helping people, but it's the only way of helping people, right? Scientology will planet. Now, to just briefly explain what that means, in Scientology, you believe that everybody has a reactive mind, which is responsible for all of the negative emotions, all of the ups, angers, problems you've got with your life. That's all caused by this reactive mind. And the goal of Scientology is to remove that reactive mind through the process of auditing, through delivering and practicing Scientology. And the Scientology is the only thing that can do that. It's the only effective way of doing that. And if everybody on the planet reaches this state of clear, i.e., not having a reactive mind, then the whole world will be a much better place. Essentially, is the crux of it. I'm massively paraphrasing it. But you come to believe that Scientology is the only way of doing it. And so therefore, Scientology becomes more important than anything else. So if you are sat in a room and someone's shouting at you, or, you know, some sort of verbal abuse like that, you're not sat there going, this is great. You're sat there thinking this is rubbish. But you justify it in your head as greatest good. You think that, yeah, it's not great that this is happening, but ultimately this has to happen because it's what will clear the planet, and it's what will make humanity better, basically. So there's lots of little moments through like that through my journey, but I ended up getting kicked out and declared a potential trouble source after being locked in a room and forced to write confessions and, you know, held against my will and all of this. Even after that happened, I still thought that that was the right thing to do. I didn't like the fact that I was held against my will, but I thought that the ethics officer, the person who had done that to me, was doing it for my sake, to save me, to force me to confess to things, which will therefore lead to a better existence for me. So I was aware that it wasn't great, but you don't look at it as abuse, because you look at it as he's actually helping me. And I don't like it, but the way out is the way through, is what we used to say. But it wasn't until 8 or 10 years or something after leaving, after not being in the organization every day, meeting people, seeing people, being indoctrinated, that I started to look at it differently, because I realized I was still subconsciously applying Scientology techniques without realizing it. And I thought, hold on, this is how come I'm still doing this thing that's a Scientology thing when I haven't even been there in 10 years. Then I started seeing a psychologist and a therapist who helped me sort of unpack it and realize that, yeah, it reprograms your brain to think in a different way. And because of that, it then is harmful to you as a person. That's when I went down the rabbit hole of starting to Google Scientology and reading all of these abuse stories for the first time ever, because that's not something I'd came across when I first joined.
Do you remember, to kind of hark back to your instance of having to sit with an ethics officer? One, could you kind of explain, I guess, why you got kicked out of the church? Because you got kicked out and rejoined, didn't you? So what led to you to get kicked out in the first place? And could you explain, I guess, this instance of having to sit down and confess, I guess, stuff about your wrongdoings to the church and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it's kind of complicated, but essentially the first time, so I had just finished my GCSEs at school, so I was 15, 16, around that age, and I had joined staff to work for the church because I wanted to become a lawyer. Essentially, I was going to do a history degree and then convert to law, but I thought, look, I don't have to go to college, I can do that a bit later. Now that I finished school, I'm free to do what I want to do. So I was doing Scientology courses, and they said, hey, you get on with everyone here, don't you? Yes. Okay. You enjoy being here? Yes. Okay. Well, why wouldn't you want to help other people with Scientology? And the best way of doing that is joining staff. I was like, okay, fine. I can join staff, but I have to leave in September because I'm going to have to go to college or sixth form. The only way around that would be to convince my family that I don't have to go to sixth form or college because I'm doing the staff thing now. And because they weren't Scientologists, that was a big task. But I joined staff fully under the impression that I would either have to leave a few months later, or we would have to do some sort of program to convince my family that Scientology is the way forward rather than going to university. And obviously that didn't happen. My family aren't Scientologists, and they were a little bit concerned about the fact that I was spending so much time there. So I left staff in September and went back to school. And then a couple months later, I think, or it was 8 months later, it was October. There's a big international gathering at the St. Hill Scientology's UK headquarters. It's called the International Association of Scientologists. It's their biggest annual event in Europe. It's a huge fundraising event, and David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, comes to the UK to give a speech about what's been going on in the last year and so on. Big event in the calendar. I was meant to go to that, and I received a phone call the night before that said I can't go to that event. I was going to bring my mum with me to show her what Scientology is all about. And this phone call said, you can't come because you've got a connection to a suppressive person, an enemy of the church. And I didn't know who it was. I don't know how they knew. It never really was found out. And they said, you can't therefore do any Scientology courses. You can't come back into the org until we handle this situation. Because in Scientology, if you're connected to an enemy of the church, that means you're a potential trouble source, because they're going to interrupt your spiritual gain. So obviously I was a bit upset, but because of that, all of my friends that I'd made in Scientology overnight stopped talking to me. Everybody completely cut communication with you because you're now seen as connected to an enemy. So several months later, I then was picked up by Flag, which is their Clearwater, Florida-based, one of their headquarters, the Mecca of Scientology. And they were trying to sell me some courses and stuff, and I explained what happened. And they said, well, that doesn't sound right. You shouldn't have been told that. There are no, ethics orders in your folder that says you're an enemy. We never found out who the person was. I think it was something like, mum had a family member who had a co-worker who had a cousin or something who was against Scientology. We never found out exactly who it was, never found out how Scientology knew about it. And essentially they said you shouldn't have been kicked out. So I was then re-welcomed back into the group. And then I rejoined staff because I'd finished sixth form at this point, and then was posted as director of public book sales. So my job was to sell books and recruit new people into Scientology. So I was doing that for a period of time. And then I was upset still because I said, look, I thank you for welcoming me back, but I'm still upset that happened to me. I shouldn't have been kicked out. And I feel like I've been made some sort of villain here when all I've tried to do is make it work and be a good person. And so I was upset, and I went into an auditing session that was meant to try and handle that upset and try and resolve the issue. And it just made me worse. I came out of that session, I was bawling in tears, I was crying, and I was like, look, I just want Scientology to work for me, but right now it's making me feel more upset, and it's traumatizing me. And that was interpreted to mean that I was saying Scientology doesn't work, and because of that, I was then punished. So I then had to go into a room and do what's called an OW write-up, which is overts and withholds. So you basically confess to all of your crimes in your life and your past lives. And I wasn't allowed to leave that room until I confessed to something, whether it was true or not. I had to confess to something to let me out of that room. And at that point, I was handed a potential trouble source declare and said, don't come back unless you do this return program, which is a list of courses you have to do to, make amends and that sort of stuff, which I then started to do because I still at that point believed in Scientology, because I thought, look, it's something gone wrong here. It hasn't been applied correctly, or it hasn't been done right. Because in Scientology, the belief is if you apply it correctly, it works 100% of the time. So the only time it's not working is because someone's messed up. So I still believed that, but then over a period of a year or two after that, it kind of gradually drifted away and stopped doing courses. And about 8 years later, realized I was still applying Scientology without realizing it, and started Googling it. And then I read all of these horrible stories of abuse that people suffered that was way worse than anything I ever went through. People have forced to have abortions and thrown in the lake in winter punishment. People have been, put on hard manual labor as punishment and this sort of thing. And like the level of abuse at the international management level is way worse. And I had no idea about any of that now. So at the time. So then I kind of made it my mission to do what I can to make amends and put things right. I helped a lot of people into Scientology. So it's only fair that I help people get out now.
Are there any skills or values that you've taken from that you still use? Is it all totally negative, or is there anything that you can still look on as maybe it was okay?
Yeah, I mean, look, so Scientology there is nothing really new in Scientology. Everything that Scientology is based on is something that L. Ron Hubbard stole or borrowed from another religion or belief system or philosophical way of thinking. At the very entry levels of Scientology, the whole point is to give you little tips and tricks and tools you can use to benefit your life, how to communicate better, how to find self-confidence, and all these little things that you would find in any sort of self-help group are all the basic entry-level parts of Scientology. But whether it's Scientology that is the thing that's helpful or not is another debate, because the things that you're actually doing are just borrowed from other groups. But you don't know that in Scientology. But yeah, I think no one would join Scientology if there weren't things in the beginning that were helpful in some sort of way. But the way that it's set up and the way that it works pulls you in. It becomes all consuming. Scientology is a totalitarian extremist belief system. There is no room for any other practice. There's no room for any other interpretation of the text. What L. Ron Hubbard wrote is gospel, and you cannot change it. So if something isn't working right, it's because you're doing something wrong.
Is there a real kind of cult of personality around L. Ron Hubbard? Like, obviously, I know he's seen as almost this like messianic figure. But like, I read somewhere that like in his UK kind of homestead, there's like a Coke stain, and that's like kept like from when he was around and he'd spilt a bit of Coke, like Coca-Cola. Not that he'd been like snorting lines in his homestead, possible. But like, yeah. So is the cult of personality around L. Ron Hubbard like rampant as it is in other kind of culty religions?
Yeah, so Scientology, if you look at what makes a cult, if you look at Steve Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, if you look at Janja Lalich's work, or, you know, there are so many people out there who have investigated and studied cults. And there are several things that make a cult. There is coercive control, there's the, you know, emphatic leader and all of this. And Scientology fits the bill. But Scientology is kind of one of the more dangerous ones because it uses every single technique in the cult handbook, right? There are some cults who use some of them and are harmful, but Scientology is like the mother of all cults. It has all of the coercive control techniques. It has all of the behavior, information, thought, and emotion. Every part of you is controlled by the organization. You don't realize it at the time. But to answer your question, L. Ron Hubbard is seen as source. He's the source of all the information, right? So he's seen as man's best friend. He's not someone that is worshipped, but he is someone that has put all of his effort and life and money into researching the mind, and he's found this way of helping people, and he's dedicated his whole life to doing that, and he died doing it. So in a way, he's seen as like someone to be massively respected, but he's not worshipped. He passed away in 1986, and Dave Miscavige took over, who is now leading Scientology. And he's been at the helm of Scientology longer than L. Ron Hubbard ever was. And what we're seeing now is this interesting shift in David Miscavige being seen as this really important person that, again, is dedicating his life to fulfilling the aims of Scientology. But what isn't known about L. Ron Hubbard, for example, is a lot of his life, if not all of it, is based on lies. You know, if you read Barefaced Messiah, which is a book by Russell Miller, it's a biography of his life. He exposes everything that LRH said about himself to be false or exaggerated. You know, he claims to be a war hero. He claims to have done this and that and the other. And if you actually look at the records, you know, it's all exaggerated, it's all made up. And he's this bigger than life person. And what he ends up doing is creating this whole system of control that is still used to this day.
I mean, he was a fiction writer as well, wasn't he? So I imagine that helps the kind of pumping up his own kind of self-narrative if he has those.
David Miscavige has got that thing about him as well. He's got that weird mystique where he just looked, you know, you meet a famous person and they've got like aura around them. I weirdly feel like he's got that.
Yeah.
Like he's got that weird, I don't know, he's got that thing about him that just looks different to everybody else. Maybe because he's on stage in like the most insane bright lights church ever, but he's got the look of a...
Like Tom Cruise.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. He looks like the guy, and he is the guy, isn't he?
Yeah, but you got to remember, he beats his staff, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not
we're
saying
trying
he's...
to
Yeah.
talk about him positively.
Totally.
Yeah, he has an aura around him, but it's an aura of fear. It's you comply. What he says, you do. And so when you live a life where everybody around you does whatever you say because they're scared of being physically harmed if they don't, when that person walks into a room, he has a presence. That's not necessarily a good thing.
No,
God,
absolutely
no.
not. I mean, a lot of people who aren't good people have got presences, but were you ever in the room with them? Did you ever go to one of these big things that you said that you were banned from? Did you ever get to go?
No, I never saw Dave Miscavige in person. He lives over in the States. He's based in LA and goes over to Clearwater quite a lot. He only comes to the UK once a year for this this event. And you've got to remember, he is like the Pope of Scientology. He is extremely protected. You will not get anywhere near him without like serious background checks and clearances. In Scientology, there's different levels of confidentiality with the levels where you find out about Xenu, the space alien, all this sort of stuff. Like, you don't find out that information unless you have been interrogated and made sure that you are safe and you are not going to spill the beans and you are a trusted person. The same goes for anyone coming into contact with David Miscavige. For example, he came to London Org once to sign off they basically built this extension, or they refurbished part of the org for Tom Cruise because he was filming Mission Impossible in London, and so he needed somewhere to come and do his Scientology. So they spent a load of money refurbing part of the building. Dave Miscavige came over to sign it off to say, yes, that's fine for Tom to use. And they shipped in hundreds of staff members from around the world to temporarily work at London Org to make it seem busier than it actually was. And anyone who didn't look upstat, i.e., upstat means up statistics. So anyone who looked a bit scruffy, or someone who wasn't, somewhat attractive, or someone who wasn't clean or had messy hair or anything like that, they were shipped off to work in a different building for the day. So they didn't come anywhere near Dave Miscavige. That's the level of control around that person. So you're only going to meet the guy if you are in the upper level echelons of management.
Which also costs a lot of money to get to them levels, doesn't it? So these people, they're invested monetarily as well as...
No, so that's the three levels we were talking about. So public Scientologists, they pay money to do the courses. So if you want to go at the Bridge to Total Freedom, that's what you pay money for. So it starts with like a life improvement course that's £30, and you read a book, you answer questions, and you apply it, and then you go up and up and up, and you do the levels. There are different things, like grade 0, for example, is teaching you how to communicate, and the end goal of that grade is to be able to communicate freely with anybody on any subject. So you do this whole practice to give you that goal, and then once you've achieved that, you go to the next level. And then yes, there ends up being a state called clear, where you get rid of your reactive mind, and then you go into the OT levels, operating thetans. You as a spiritual being is called a thetan. That's just another word for spirit. And so the idea is Scientology is helping you find and reclaim your lost spiritual abilities as a spiritual being. You are more powerful and more able and more impressive than you can ever imagine, because you're innately a godlike spiritual being. And so Scientology is going to help you find these godlike powers and abilities, and that's what Scientology is all about. So the OT levels is operating thetans. So that's where you are operating as a spiritual being rather than just as a human on planet Earth, right? And so OT3 is the level where you learn about Xenu, the space aliens, and all of that. OT8 is the highest that you can ever get in Scientology. There's no more levels above that. And you have to go to the ship, the Free Winds, to do that. The only place on Earth they deliver that level is on their cruise ship. Someone tell me it's a cult without telling me it's a cult.
Wow.
And so those are the things that cost money, right? If you like the vast majority of Scientologists don't get to OT level. Most Scientologists don't know the Xenu story. The OT levels, if you're getting to the top of the bridge OT8, you're at least $1 million down the drain into the organization. But the staff don't pay for their processing. In fact, most staff don't get trained because you are working full time for the church. So if you are in the upper echelons of management, yes, they'll probably get you up to the OT levels eventually. But the priority is getting the job done. You are working 18-hour days, 7 days a week with no time off. And you have a statistic. I mentioned upstat earlier. Your stats have to be up every single week. For example, I was a bookseller, so my number of books I sold every week has to go up and up and up. If it doesn't go up and I books this week and I did last week, I get punished for that. So because of that, you spend more and more of your time making sure your statistic is going up rather than studying and learning how to be a good Scientologist and going up the bridge. So yes, everyone in Dave Miscavige's inner circle will probably be OTs, but they will also probably be staff members who are working extreme hours. So they haven't paid to get to that level, but on the most part.
When you say your upstat had to go up week by week and you got punished, what's an example of a punishment if you hadn't that week?
Again, so punishments vary at different levels of the organization, and the higher up you get, the worse it gets. Hard manual labor is a very common one. So there was 1 week my stats were down, and so in order to make amends, I firstly make sure my stats went back up the next week. But secondly, I had to scrub there was like a wall that needed repainting. And instead of using paint strip or whatever, I had to use sugar soap and a sponge to hand wash all of the paint off of this wall. And then the next day, paint it white. It didn't really need repainting in the first place. But menial tasks like that for hours a day as a 16-year-old, that's a very base level. Like, that's not a nice thing to do to a person. But when you compare that to the trauma that people have at the international base, like, I have friends who are put on what's called the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is basically a North Korean style re-education camp in the desert in California, where you are locked in a room, you are forced to do hard manual labor and interrogations 18 to 20 hours a day. You're not allowed to sleep unless, half an hour sleep or whatever is about all you'll get. You're fed nothing but rice and beans. You're not allowed to shower, and all that sort of stuff. That is really horrifically abusive. And that is far worse than anything I ever experienced. And that's part of why I'm trying to speak out, is to try and get people to realize it's a crazy cult, yes, but it's a harmful movement that's abusing people.
Is that the same kind of place where I know it's kind of touched on in the Louis Theroux kind of film, I think, where like, and this is going to sound silly, but they would make people play like musical chairs in a way to just like completely ground down. Is that the same place?
Yeah, that's it. That's the RPF. And
it's just to completely ground down your sense of character and that kind of stuff. I mean, especially the musical, because What do you think about the kind of idea? Obviously, Scientology is joked about often. It's parodied in South Park. This idea of Tom Cruise and John Travolta and all these kind of stars that get the Mickey taken out of them for being in Scientology. How much do you think that harms the kind of what you're working towards, which is to outline how serious a threat Scientology is to people?
I don't think it's harmful. I think anybody that knows about Scientology as anything other than a helpful organization is beneficial. I think any and all effort to raise awareness about what Scientology is like is helpful and beneficial. I think it's such a wild thing that people find really hard to believe that the stuff is going on in Scientology that it is. So I think from a raising public awareness perspective, it's done a tremendous deal of help. If 20 years ago someone went to the press and said, hey, there's this abusive organization, there may have been some press articles, but throw in some space opera and some celebrities, the tabloids love it, right? And it's important to have that aspect to it, because it's important for people who wouldn't care otherwise to know something about it. And even though they might not know about the abuses, they know it's a bit weird and therefore don't go and join. So any and all effort to talk about it, I think, is beneficial. But I think, what I'm really trying to do is change the narrative, because people are abused in Scientology at every level in which there is an organization in every city. Most Scientologists don't know about the space aliens Xenu story. Most Scientologists don't know that there are people being punished on the RPF with musical chairs, like you mentioned, in California, because they're lied to in Scientology. When you ask those questions, you're told, no, that's just completely made up. The tabloids are lying. You know what they're like. And so because you're gaslit and lied to, you end up going even deeper into your belief system and trusting nobody but the Scientology people you're speaking to. If you don't trust information from anybody else and you don't trust the media, then you end up looking at Scientology for all of your information. Like, that becomes the sole source of information, and that's how they exert control over you.
So with your obvious knowledge of these people and the things they can do, are you not fearful of reprisal with you know, being a whistleblower? How does that work? How do you get past that?
Yeah, so Scientology have a policy called fair game, which is how they come after anybody who speaks out against the organization. Now, you have to remember what I said earlier. What L. Ron Hubbard wrote is gospel. You cannot change it. So if L. Ron Hubbard wrote that you need to communicate to other organizations via telex, you have to communicate via telex, even though there's this wonderful thing called the internet that now exists that didn't exist when L. Ron Hubbard was alive. That means sending an email is a lot easier and quicker, right? However, because LRH wrote you had to write a telex, the orgs still communicate through a system called telex, right? And everything is printed on paper, right? Yes, there are digital files, but there are physical files too. So because of that, you can't change what he wrote. So even though there are things that damage Scientology's reputation, they still do it. And fair game is one of those prime examples. L. Ron Hubbard was kicked out of the UK in 1969, I think it was. And he was blasted by the UK government. It was a visa situation. They denied his visa and said, don't come back. You're doing harm to us and our country. And so he went on the attack, and he developed this policy called fair game, which is anybody that speaks out against Scientology, anybody that criticizes it, whether you're an ex-Scientologist or a journalist, the policy is to trick, lie to, sue, or otherwise destroy that person. So if it was legal, they would be killing off these people, right? They're not going to kill people off because that's illegal. And they do try and stick within the law in certain aspects of what they do, but there are huge human rights abuses in other aspects. For example, the punishment we talked about. But they're not going to go around overtly shooting people down the street, because that would be too bad for the church's public image, because that's all they care about. So coming after critics is not something I was sort of surprised would happen when I spoke out, but it's not something that I should necessarily accept, because yes, speaking out is something that they're going to come after you for, but that doesn't mean you should tolerate it. They have written to my family members trying to get them to be concerned about me. They have knocked on my neighbors' doors. They have sent over 2,000 tweets with my face photoshopped on them. They've bought the domain name, which has got my name in it. They have hate pages up on the internet. They've written numerous statements to the press calling me this, that, and the other. And yes, it comes with the territory, but it's not nice. I'm not complaining, because yes, that's what to expect when you speak out about Scientology. But the point that I'm trying to make to other people is that they're quite powerless, in that they will try to disturb your life and disrupt it in any way they can. But ultimately, you have the power to speak out against Scientology. And the more people that do it and say, hey, this happened to me, the more people will have the courage, because they're not going to be able to come after everybody, so it's power and numbers type thing.
Are you the first real big threat from the UK to Scientology?
No, absolutely not. There have been critics of Scientology ever since they set up shop here in 1959, since it began, there was a whole investigation with the Home Office, and the government in the 1970s released, and it's only recently been declassified, but there was a whole covert operation looking at Scientology and its harms, and it ruled Scientology as a harmful, dangerous movement. And a High Court judge in the 1980s ruled that it goes after young people and it should be banned. Despite all of these things, it still exists in the UK, and it still continues to do the things that it has been doing all this time. And I personally think that that's outrageous. But no, there have been people who have spoken out about Scientology for decades. John Atack is one example. He started speaking out in the 1980s, and he still does so on his YouTube channel. Bonnie Woods, she sued Scientology in the early 2000s and won a harassment case against them in the High Court. And there are many, many people before me. I think what's different is we're now in the internet age. There was the anonymous movement in 2008, which was the first time there was real, huge national, international media attention on this organization that utilized the internet for what they were doing. But we're now in the age of live streaming, podcasts. It's very easy for anybody to just log online, set up a channel, and set up a camera and say, hey, this happened to me in Scientology. And other people are like, wow, that happened to me as well. I'm not the only one. And then you create this little community of people who have found the courage to speak out. And because there's so many of us now, the church are very powerless in coming after us. So very long-winded answer to your question. No, I'm not the first, but I'm certainly probably the biggest threat in the UK at the moment. There are other people speaking out, and I stand there alongside lots of other protesters. But I'm trying to kind of take it by the leash and go, okay, this is what we need to do: speak to politicians or work with press, and kind of really spearheading the movement in the UK. But there are many more people with more followers and subscribers and more media attention than me over in the States, and there are people who have created much more media attention than I ever did way before I even started.
Do you get, or I mean, it's a redundant question, how much pushback do you get when you organise the kind of protests against Scientology in the UK?
Yeah, so they will do everything they can to shut us down. They will plant people to try and infiltrate the group. At the moment, we are going through the process with Mid Sussex District Council because Scientology attempted to, or they've requested a ban on protesting. They applied for what's called a Public Spaces Protection Order, which is a temporary restriction on human rights in a specific area for the purpose of preventing disorder. So, for example, if they're just Stop Oil, for example, might be having a protest that is stopping traffic getting past, they could implement a PSPO to stop people protesting actually in the highway because it's stopping ambulances getting through, right? So that's the purpose with which is meant to be used, to stop disruption to the local community that is persistent and ongoing. Scientology applied for one of these to say that our annual protest that happens once a year at their annual event in October, that's only happened twice in the last 6 years, was causing alarm and distress. It is persistent and ongoing, and therefore it needs to be banned. And so at the last protest that happened just recently in October, there were council observers watching us and observing whether we were causing disruption. And we had a period of time where we could present evidence, and we're fighting our case. We won't know for several months whether Mid Sussex District Council decide to implement a PSPO. But if they do, the recourse is to take it to the High Court. And the sort of thing that I'm trying to say is, it's not persistent ongoing because it happens once a year. We're not protesting their so-called religious beliefs. We're protesting the abuse inside the organization. If people want to be Scientologists, they're more than welcome to be my guest. But you can't lock people in rooms, throw people in lakes, and physically abuse and harm people. That's the sort of behavior that I'm protesting. And it's something that is important and gets national media attention. And it's not something that damages the local community. In fact, all of the traffic issues, the congestion, and all of that is caused by the thousands of Scientologists attending the event from over Europe, not from our small protest of 20 people on the side of the road. But it just goes to show Scientology will do anything they possibly can to stop people criticizing their organization. You know, on one hand, they will organize a protest against electric shock therapy or truth about drugs, one of their many front groups, their sort of social betterment programs. They'll organize a protest for that, but at the same time try and shut down our protest against their abuse. And it's like, look, we have free speech and the right to assembly in this country, and I'm fighting with every ounce of my being to keep that.
Does the kind of potential legislative action, speaking as someone, so I mean, I did that post there, I did a documentary where I looked into a Korean kind of church, a bit similar to like the Moonies, and I was very worried when I put it out, even though it was like a student project when I put it together, that I was going to get hit with legal action, because they were very legislative. Obviously Scientology have a history of that kind of stuff as well, and taking people to court. Does any of that worry you more so than maybe the people kind of coming after you, you know, with calling you a suppressive person? Does the legislative side worry you at all?
Scientology are very litigious. They do come after anybody and everybody in any way that they can. But fortunately, I know the policies. I know how they operate, because I used to be a Scientologist. And the policy is to threaten to sue, not to actually sue. So they will do anything they possibly can to stop me from speaking out. They have filed privacy complaints against every single one of my videos on YouTube. They've reported me to the police for harassment. All of this sort of stuff, knocking on my neighbors' doors, you know, showing up at my parents' house to try and, you know, cause concern about me. All of this stuff comes with the territory. It's not something that is nice. But no, it doesn't scare me because I stand up to bullies, and their goal is to tie me up into litigation. Well, fortunately, I have one of the best lawyers in the country who has taken on Scientology many times before, who understands the way that they operate. So Scientology will likely never sue me. But if I was to ever sue Scientology, then they would sue back. And the whole point is to drown you in paperwork and bankrupt you with legal fees. So fortunately, my lawyer is aware of that, and we won't fall for those sorts of tricks. But that doesn't mean they won't be crafty and do anything else that they can. Like, for example, every news article or journalist I've ever worked with gets mountains of paperwork filled with legal threats and accusations, and a huge docket that says I'm an anti-religious bigot and I was kicked out of the church for cause and blah, 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 and how horrible I am and how untrustworthy I am, how I'm lying about everything. All of this stuff gets sent to all of these journalists. And the whole point is to scare them into not publishing a story that's against Scientology. So I do my best to try and brief these people on, hey, just to let you know, you're going to receive all of this. But if you publish it, they're not actually going to sue you because you're going to need to, or they're going to need to prove all of the points that they're accusing people of. And they can't because most of it's just made up. So suing someone opens you both up to litigation and everything going out into the public domain. And Scientology don't want that. They have $3 to $6 billion in the bank with which to defend their religious freedom and their legal rights and all this sort of stuff. They will use that in court cases, but they won't sue you unless they absolutely are 100% certain they're going to win. And 9 times out of 10, they won't.
Is it true that Scientology has this kind of, I guess, this catalogue? So, for instance, when Trey Parker and Matt Stone kind of parodied Scientology, I know that there was a lot of digging into their kind of background and stuff. I know Louis Theroux's had it where there's been like kind of information about him, very minimal information about him, put out there. Is there kind of a catalogue or a back catalogue from Scientology where they dig into people who have, I guess, spoken out or assisted in the speaking out of the church?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single person who has spoken out about Scientology, whether it's a former member, a critic, a journalist, anybody who's done anything publicly against Scientology, will have a folder at the Church of Scientology's Office of Special Affairs, and it will have as much information as they can find about the person. They assess your level as a threat, and then they assign resources attached to that. So they will hire private investigators to follow you and find out who you are, who your family are, where you work, what things you like, what you don't like, what you're scared of, what your financial situation's like. And they will use that to try and blackmail you into not speaking out about Scientology. But the level to which they do that is assessed based on the level of threat. So if you, for example, this is just a podcast, it's a one-off, yeah, you might get a letter from their lawyer and say, hey, I can't believe you published this interview with Alex, the anti-religious bigot, and you should take it down. But you could probably just ignore it. The whole point is just to scare you into not publishing it. But ultimately, as long as you don't keep doing episodes about Scientology, they're not going to see you as a threat. They're going to assign all of their limited resources onto the people who they see as threats. So, for example, they're coming after me pretty hard with thousands of tweets a week. So yeah, they go after people with private investigators and keep as much information as they can on you. Yeah. It's a huge covert intelligence operation.
I think we'll have a post-it note rather than a folder. Yeah,
there's not much to say about us. I've got a question. So when you made friends within science, how long were you actually a part of the church?
So it depends where you draw the line, because I considered myself a Scientologist probably for about 5 or 6 years. But I was only on staff for a short period, and then I was off staff, and then I was on again. So overall, my experience was about 5 years, but I was only on staff for a couple of those.
So that's quite, you said it was quite intense as well. So you must have made especially at that age, you must have made a lot of close friends. Do you have any links with any of them anymore? Obviously, the church won't want that, but do you have any tenuous links with anybody?
I'm considered a huge problem for the church. I am, a suppressive person. I'm their UK's #1 enemy on their hit list at the moment. So anybody who wanted to have any sort of relationship with me or contact with me whatsoever would be punished and considered equally as bad as me. So they are forbidden from having any sort of contact with me whatsoever.
Well, that must be difficult losing friends. I can't even wrap my head around it really to understand that.
Yeah, but this is the thing. Yes, it's hard. But there are so many more people who had far worse experiences than I did. There are people who have had family disconnect from them. There are people who, for example, friends of mine whose parents raised them in Scientology. They've now left and their parents haven't, because their parents have to choose between siblings. Do I want to speak to the sibling or the child who left, or do I want to speak to the child who's staying in Scientology? So 9 times out of 10, those parents choose the Scientology because they believe Scientology is the cure and the solution. So there are children whose whole families, parents, brothers, sisters, won't have anything to do with them. And when I say disconnection, I don't mean that you keep it jovial and check in once a month but don't really talk to each other. It's a complete cut cold, absolutely nothing. If you phone up your parent and they've disconnected from you because you're a suppressive person, and you go, hi mom or hi dad, they hang up the phone. They are not allowed any contact with you whatsoever. And that is even more heartbreaking. Yes, I've lost friends and that's heartbreaking and it's not nice. But what I'm trying to do is shine a light on how much worse it can be and how much worse it is for other people.
Is it true as well that there's a kind of system similar to, I guess, the Gestapo's a good explainer, in terms of that people will kind of almost rat on each other, or not rat on each other, but feel pressured to expose like family members or partners if they do something that's un-Scientology like?
Yeah, you have to write what's called knowledge reports. So if you witness someone doing something unethical, say, for example, we were all Scientologists and I knew that, Harry, you were cheating on your wife, right? With someone else. I if I knew that and I didn't report it, when it gets found out, because it will, that I knew about it and didn't report it, I would get the same punishment as you for doing something unethical. So everybody is obligated to report on everybody. And the reason is because you think Scientology can solve any situation. So by reporting you, yes, that might be difficult for you and your wife because you're cheating on them. But ultimately, by reporting you, I'm making the church aware so that Scientology can come in and help fix the problem that's causing you to want to cheat. And that will resolve your issues. So I'm doing it because I want to help you. That's the mindset, even though deep down you know it's not a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
That's how all of Scientology works. You think you're helping. Another example, when I was selling books on the streets of London, it's policy to invade someone's privacy, right? I have to sit down, I do these stress tests, with the e-meter, and you sit down the cans, and I've got to find out what's ruining your life, right? I sit down and ask questions, I get really personal, and you invade someone's privacy. It's actually policy to do that because I need to present Scientology as a solution to that. There was a saying in Scientology in London called "crying is buying." If I can get you to cry, well, then I found out what's disturbing your life or disrupting your life or causing you the most upset. So it's really easy for me to then present Dianetics and Scientology as a solution to that. What I'm doing is manipulating your emotions to sell you a book, which is a horrible thing to do, which I now recognize as wrong. But at the time, I didn't realize it was wrong. I thought I was helping that person. It was doing the greatest good. And that's one of the things that makes Scientology so dangerous. Most people in the group don't realize what they're doing is harmful.
I think there's also, from my understanding as well, it's also a lot to be said about the fact that obviously if you're told that you're this being that lives for 1 billion years, like that kind of small kind of chasm of time is minute compared to how many. Does that thought process, I guess, go through your head as a Scientologist?
Yeah, and again, there's pros and cons. It's sold to you like something that's empowering, right? If you're told you're this immortal spiritual being with innate godlike powers that we're going to help you unlock, that sounds great. Okay, amazing. Tell me more, right? But what that means is when, for example, you're a victim of rape, right? Say I've got a friend who was raped at the age of 14 at the Scientology headquarters here in the UK by an older staff member. When that happened to her, she was locked in a room and told, well, what did you do to put yourself in that situation? Because if you are an innate godlike spiritual being with more power and ability and control than you can imagine, you're responsible for the condition that you're in. So subconsciously, you must have done something, maybe in a past life, that means that you thought the right thing to do is put yourself in a situation where you could be raped. So it's called, what did you do to pull it in? You pulled in this activity. So they don't disagree that you were raped. They don't say you weren't raped, but they say, why did you let that happen to yourself? And you are treated as you were given punishment for that, right? You're not treated with care, compassion, understanding, any of that sort of stuff. No, what did you do? Why did you let that happen to yourself? You're punished when actually you're a victim of a horrible crime. So on the surface, it sounds empowering that you're a godlike spiritual being, but actually it's applied in a way that is destructive and harmful.
That's insane. Wow.
Alex, I mean, not to end it on like kind of like quite a heavy note, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And thank you so much for your time. Obviously, your work is unbelievably important. If we could give you the kind of moment to give out a message, I guess, to people to tell them the truth about Scientology, I guess the floor is yours. What would you like to say to them?
Thank you. I mean, I just want to say that, look, most Scientologists are good people, right? Like, don't yell abuse at people. If you're walking past a Church of Scientology on the street, don't treat them as though they're deliberately harming people, because most Scientologists don't realize that what they're doing is harming people. It is what they're doing, but they don't know it. They think they're helping people. So approach them with kindness and compassion, and just understand that, you know, these people are victims of modern slavery, of human trafficking, and these people are always welcome to reach out if they need support or help. If you're a Scientologist that happens to be watching this, you know, there's the Aftermath Foundation, is a charity that exists to help people escape and leave. There is a community of people here to support each other, and we're not here protesting Scientology. We're here protesting the abuse. We're trying to separate belief and behavior. And so, yeah, thank you so much for watching and listening, and I appreciate your time, both Harry and Carl.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
What's
so
your
much.
channel to send people over? Where should they go? What should they search?
Apostate Alex is my channel. I'm on YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, all that sort of stuff. Give me a subscribe and a follow, and I'll share this on my channel too, and send some people
Absolutely.
your way.
And we'll
Thank
stick
you.
all links in the
Absolutely, yeah,
description.
of course.
Alex, thank you so much for your time.
you.
Thank you for bearing with us with some technical issues at the start as well. And I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day as well.
Take care.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're so